Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. We've got Kris Goldsmith back. He leads Task Force Butler, which is an organization that tracks and exposes extremists in our midst to hold them accountable socially, financially, huge track record of success. But you got your work cut out for you, Kris, because there are 1,500 more back on the streets with Trump's pardons. I should say 1,500 minus one, because we just got reports that, and I shouldn't be flip about this, but one of them got into a standoff during a traffic stop with a police officer and was shot and killed, making the point that these are not all good people. These are not all innocent bystanders who were caught up in the moment. They're going to seed chaos across the country.
Yeah. I mean, what is most concerning to me is that Donald Trump specifically named so many members of the Oath Keepers and of the Proud Boys in his order granting clemency and pardons. That is a presidential seal of approval for domestic terrorism. You know, I think that one of the big mistakes that the Biden administration made, and Merrick Garland, in hindsight, I think was a poor choice for Attorney General. You know, I think that the Biden administration should have defined what happened on January 6th as terrorism, as Ted Cruz did in the immediate aftermath. Right? This isn't a word that I'm just pulling out of nowhere. The definition, the federal definition of terrorism is the use of force or the threat of force to coerce a government or civilian population for political ends. That is what January 6th was. And Donald Trump just gave two terrorist organizations, the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, the presidential seal of approval for committing terrorist attacks.
What are you hearing through your intelligence contacts in this world about their morale, about the state of thinking of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and these organizations that you track?
They are, everyone from the far right neo-Nazis who don't think of any political solution. They like Trump because he's a chaos agent and they hope that he collapses the United States so that they can engage in their race war, to, the MAGA grandmas who just want to see Democrats, have miserable lives. They are filled with energy right now. All of these extremists who the core of their belief is not really they want to make America great again. They want to hurt other Americans, right? That's the core of MAGA is I want to take things away from everyone else. It's not I don't have enough and I need to work for more. It's they have too much and I want it, right? That is the MAGA ethos. So everyone who subscribes to that MAGA ethos is seeing what Donald Trump is doing, granting freedom and pardons to felons, granting freedom to people who not only coordinated the violence on that day, but engaged in doing things like attacking police with intent to kill. Again, the core of MAGA being trying to take things away is consistent with the MAGA bomber from the first of the year. The veteran who blew himself in a Cybertruck outside the Las Vegas Trump Hotel that, the media seems to have forgotten about. Just 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks after a MAGA terrorist blew himself up with the explicit purpose, he wrote this down and police released these statements, that he wanted to start a war, a purge of DC, of Democrats. Donald Trump goes and pardons 1,500 terrorists. I mean, it is crazy to me that I have not heard people in the media connecting these two things. You have a MAGA terrorist blow himself up in a high profile event, calling for a literal purge. He used the word purge to kill Democrats. And then less than 3 weeks later, 19, 20 days later, we have Donald Trump pardon 1,500 more MAGA terrorists. So we are going to see more MAGA terrorist attacks in this country because of Donald Trump creating this permission structure.
It's not just a failure of legacy media to identify the threat and make people aware of it. It feels like there's a significant lack of leadership among the opposition, the political opposition, maybe not the opposition in the streets, but among the political opposition. The energy you describe on the right doesn't seem to be provoking the necessary response. Am I just a jaded Democrat looking for excuses, or do you feel a little bit disappointed as well?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I noticed from, I'm all over social media, right? I've noticed from engagement, from watching other content creators, from watching consumers of content like we're creating right now, a massive drop off. I mean, the TV ratings said that like MSNBC, which is heavily associated with the Democratic Party and Democrats watching, like their ratings plummeted, right? I think it was okay for people to lick their wounds. And the content that I was producing was saying, hey, if you need to step back and stop watching me, you know, I make, to be clear, I make money on TikTok. That's why I want people to watch my videos. I was saying, if you can't handle this right now, rest up, because we're going to need you after January 20th, right? I think there are still some people who are experiencing the shock and awe that Donald Trump is waging against our democracy, against our country, against our fellow Americans. And it is understandable that some people are just still keeping their heads down. But I do think that the tide will shift when things start getting more kinetic. The ICE raids have already, you know, a veteran last week was detained. Someone who served in uniform was detained because he was brown, right? That type of thing is happening when it's cold out. There's not a lot of witnesses, right? Like the fighting season that we have dealt with in global war on terror for 20 years, when the weather gets warmer, we will see more protests. So I expect, as long as there's snow outside my window, for things to be relatively calm. But I think that activists and everyday Americans who don't consider themselves politically engaged or activists of any kind, or anti-fascists, I think that these types of people are going to be much more motivated when the weather gets comfortable, because that's the way that humans work, right? And the ICE raids are going to get more kinetic as they get more energized and more organized, and they purge DHS of anyone who's not living up to the quotas.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who supports this show via Patreon. We're adding exclusive content every week there. So if you haven't signed up yet, head over to patreon.com/Ken Harbaugh. Every single cent we get through Patreon goes back into this show, whether it's researching topics like the piece we recently did on the U.S. Army's counter-fascism training during World War II, or my reporting trips to Ukraine to show what that country is doing to defend its democracy. These episodes can't happen without your support. I'm deeply honored that so many of you have pitched in. If you've been waiting, now would be a great time. We've got another reporting trip to Ukraine coming up and other ambitious projects in the works. We're all in this together. Thanks for everything. I think the response is going to have to depend on everyday Americans waking up, but I also think that Trump might be overestimating his mandate. We've had ICE raids in my community here, and they have been met with nothing but outrage. I mean, a little bit is the FAFO effect, right? What do you mean you're shutting down my favorite? And I know it's a trope, but this happened. I'm not making this up. What do you mean you're shutting down my favorite taqueria? Right? That happened 2 days ago in Cleveland Heights. When it comes home, when it affects people that you have a personal relationship with, it, I think, will eventually provoke the kind of antibodies that have kept this democracy a democracy. God help us if it doesn't, but I'm counting on it.
Oh, yeah. And I think a lot of men, of my demographic, men who are kind of like older millennials who may have gotten the opportunity to buy a home and are ready to move from the starter home to the next one, with the tariffs against Canada, like where we get all of our lumber, with a significant portion of the workforce that that builds homes is going to be either in hiding or having been deported. The prices of construction are going to skyrocket, and we are going to see inflation from that across the board. I remember during the pandemic, I'm a hobbyist, right? I was going around when the whole world was shut down. I had a Tyvek suit and a painter's mask. I could do anything I wanted, right? And I watched as lumber prices at Lowe's spiked and at Home Depot spiked, and everything else followed. We're going to experience that again because of Donald Trump's trade war. So between the deportations of the workforce who are home builders and the prices of supplies, specifically lumber from Canada, I think that men of my generation who fucked around voting for Trump are going to be finding out, and they're going to have some regrets, and hopefully that gets them engaged.
Well, it's incumbent upon us to pin the responsibility for that on Trump. I think the best distillation of the election that I came across, I mean, it could have fit on a bumper sticker. Mm-hmm. People voted Democrats out because they were mad at Democrats. We have to make them mad at Republicans.
Yeah.
It's about as simple as that. And to me, the facts are on our side. We just have to communicate them.
Yeah. And look, I have become, I think considered, thanks in large part to Against All Enemies, one of the nation's experts on veterans and extremism. Donald Trump just eliminated the extremism program in the DoD, which, to be clear, wasn't good under the Biden administration anyway. So maybe it's not that huge of a loss. But we are going to see radicalized veterans who were kicked out of the military because they believed in all these COVID disinformation campaigns. They didn't get the shot. Now they're getting reinstated should they want to get back into the military with 4 years of back pay. That's a tremendous amount of disposable income. Those people who have, a lot of them became like Maga influencers after they, became a martyr for the cause, refusing the shot. Now they're back in the military, and they're going to be in positions of leadership because they'll have an extra 4 years of time in service that they didn't serve. Right. So we're going to be having MAGA people who are immersed in the disinformation bubbles, who were not in uniform, who, when we were in uniform, we didn't have time for disinformation, right? But these guys have had 4 years to self-radicalize, and they're going to be radicalizing junior troops who are a captive audience and are impressionable. 18-year-old young men, for the most part, mostly men, are impressionable, as I was when I was in uniform. And the extremism that we are going to see on the other end of Trump's 4 years is going to be bigger than it is today.
And it's going to be with us for a long, long time. I mean, we are sowing seeds that will, there's a Supreme Court quote about they will bear terrible fruit for decades to come. You kind of blew past this point. I want to double click on it. 8,000 people were kicked out for refusing to obey orders to take the shot to protect their fellow troops. They are all getting 4 years of back pay for work they never did, which is kind of a slap in the face to everyone who did get the shot, who did take care of their buddies, who worked for those 4 years, to see these folks either come back. Well, either way, whether they come back in the military or not, they're getting a huge check from Pete Hegseth, from the DOD, for having disobeyed an order to keep their shipmates, their squad mates safe. It's crazy. I want to go back to, do you want to weigh in on that? Because before I was the veteran expert on extremism, I was the bad paper discharge guy. I spent years on Capitol Hill working to help veterans with bad paper discharges, with less than honorable discharges, who were kicked out because symptoms of PTSD, TBI, military sexual trauma were interpreted as misconduct. That's what happened to me personally. The Trump administration, I was in DC for all of the Trump administration working for a major veteran service organization. The Trump administration was not very helpful. Secretary Shulkin he specifically went rogue and granted access to vets
without warning the Trump administration, which was great for me personally and for all the people I've been trying to help. But Donald Trump's people, like, we have to be specific here. He is paying them a financial reward for being extremists. Like, if he believed in this logic, and if Pete Hegseth believed in this logic of when people are kicked out of the military unjustly, we owe them back pay. Well, there's tens of thousands of veterans who are kicked out, you know, between Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or before that, you know, when there was unnamed policy against people being from the LGBTQ community. All of the veterans who were kicked out, as I was kicked out for a suicide attempt that they interpreted as misconduct, which I think today anyone at the VA or anyone in DoD healthcare would recognize immediately. After I had a year-long combat deployment, my job at 19 years old was photo documenting mass graves. I had serious PTSD, and I wasn't getting treated for it, right? If Trump and Pete Hegseth truly believed in the logic of paying people for the injustice of being kicked out of the military without good cause, they would be helping people like me, but they're not.
Yep. They're helping the guys who didn't take the shot to make a political statement and put all of their buddies in jeopardy. Can you, for last question, can you help us understand the historical context of releasing brown shirts, whatever we want to call them these days, back onto the streets in anticipation of resistance to your policies?
Yeah. So there's a history of when authoritarians come to power, Adolf Hitler being the most famous one, of working their way into a position to pardon their old buddies, to pardon the unsuccessful, unlawful militiamen and fascist street gangs who were arrested and who were tried and convicted, rightfully so, you know, under the rules of democracy, given due process, right? Adolf Hitler attempted to end democracy in Germany long before he became the chancellor. He participated and led the beer hall push, and the Nazis tried to end democracy in Germany there. They failed. He was given a relative slap on the wrist. And when he came out, much like Donald Trump getting a slap on the wrist for all of his felonies, when he came out, he was much more powerful. He went and he pardoned all of his brown shirts, and he had, from that, an even more loyal following of extremists who are willing to use and have been proven to have already used violence for political gain. Again, an army of terrorists. That's what the brown shirts were. That's what the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers are today. And Donald Trump has had Stuart Rhodes already showing up at his events and sitting in the VIP section.
Do you think the character of the brown shirts, of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys is going to change in that it'll professionalize? Are they going to get infusions of cash? That's one of my big fears. They were kind of mocked by other veterans for a long time. They have a certain shine on them now. They did a victory parade on Inauguration Day through DC. I wouldn't be surprised if oligarchs the like of Elon Musk think, you know, maybe this is the next big investment. That really concerns me.
I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene for years has been known to use 3%ers and other extremist militias as security when she was campaigning and even after she got into office. So we've already seen one of Donald Trump's closest allies in Congress doing this. I do expect for extremist organizations like the Oath Keepers, potentially even the Proud Boys, to be deputized. If not as part of support for these, anti-immigrant ICE raids, absolutely when Donald Trump continues doing campaign rallies. Sure, the Constitution says he can't run for office again. And I think that whatever crazy Republican congressman introduced a bill for messaging to try and get Trump a third term, like, that's not going anywhere. But Donald Trump doesn't need to be eligible for office to continue campaigning. his campaign coffers are still collecting donations, right? So he's going to continue doing rallies. And as the level of unrest starts to warm up with the weather this spring and summer, he's going to start doing rallies in places like New York City and Los Angeles and Chicago. And he's going to, I think, probably have his campaign maybe even officially deputize Proud Boys and Oath Keepers as security, in addition to the Secret Service.
Terrifying prospect. And I think in addition, we're about to see as a country how power actually works in Washington. Mm-hmm. Because I would submit, I mean, it's almost Putin-esque in a way, in that Trump doesn't necessarily need to issue an EO or get Congress to pass something. If he gets the people who have the levers of power to do his will, then it doesn't matter how it happens. If Rez Vogt over at OMB is doing his midnight massacres, I mean, that's the weird magic of Putin's power in Russia. Mm-hmm. Statutorily, he doesn't have all that much, but his coterie is so terrified of him that they do what he wants to do. And I guess in America, you wouldn't even have to be president to pull that off. We're looking over the horizon here, but, you know, God forbid, maybe Trump doesn't need a third term if his heir apparent is beholden to him.
Yeah. And, you know, it is in 2020, Donald Trump attempted to interfere in our election and he was not successful. I don't see any reason that he would not directly interfere in our election in 2028. Now, I don't want to scare people and say like democracy is over, the fascists have won, right? But he will try. He will try to do everything he can to cheat his way into ensuring that his legacy is kept and that we keep heading towards authoritarianism in a way that will benefit him and his offspring.
I think that's it. I also am not yet in the alarmist category of warning about a Trump third term, but Trumpism, with all of its features now being institutionalized, that's here to stay. Mm-hmm. At least as far as the Republican Party goes, they are fully bought into it. So yeah, now's the time to resist.
Well, I mean, you made a movie about it. Like JD Vance is in position. Like he's been staying in the background for now. He doesn't have to start campaigning anytime soon. But JD Vance, I think, is the scariest of the potentials. Sure, he's not the entertainer that Donald Trump is. He hasn't been able to flex his power the way that Ron DeSantis has as governor. But he is well positioned to carry the torch of Trumpism after Donald Trump's first 4 years or second 4-year term.
Yep. Well, Kris, we'll keep an eye on it. Thanks for everything you're doing. Let's talk again soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, brother.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.